Why are people talking? There we go. Hello, everyone, and we are live. I did not forget to push the go live button. Don't worry. So today we are going to be talking with Bass. For those of you that haven't seen, Bass actually came on. What was it? A couple of months ago now. Last year.
I haven't checked the calendar to see how far ago it was, but it feels like ages.
Yeah, it does. And we were talking about Notion in that one, and today we will probably cover Notion to some extent, but we're going to dive in a little bit into privacy, security, and probably general productivity tips, tricks, hacks, general chit chat. I will say you have a YouTube channel, Tools on Tech. Do you want to talk a little bit about the channel and what you do?
Yeah, well, I'll make it a two-parter here, because for the security bit, which we're going to talk about, outside my YouTube channel, when I'm working, I'm an infra engineer. I used to do security for large companies. I think eBay, the city of Amsterdam I'm currently working for. I'm moving up on the management level. So I know quite a bit about security in general, because I constantly had to make sure that applications are secured. And I'm also constantly failing with my WordPress site, because those things are under constant attack, and I'm too busy with my work and my YouTube channel. So then at some point I get like a message saying, like, your site is hacked again. I thought I fixed this, and it gets better. I got scripts and everything for it, and it's all automated, and there's more code in there than you've probably learned by now, Danny. But it's
I've done 1 hour of HTML.
Well, then I'm gonna be on that one, yeah, definitely. But it's fun to do. Outside that, like on my Fridays that I try to keep free all the time, I work on my YouTube channel where I talk about Notion, Tools on Tech, and I really love doing it. Only it's been less frequent lately, but that's because I'm switching. No worries. End of this month, I'm done with the whole switch where I'm trying to run 2 companies at the same time, and I hope to have more time, get more frequent. Also, you mentioned last time, because I was taking like longer and longer for my videos because I wanted to make them perfect and see how far I can stretch that. And then you said, like, I can sometimes make a video by just switching on the camera, and go like, okay, I need to go back to that. It's like, so I'm trying to find that new balance now, where I'm trying to not touch Blender all the time and just take a topic, dive deep, and spend a bit more time talking and a bit less time in the editor, which is also much more fun.
Oh yeah, we're nerds. Well, I am. I don't know whether you publicly admit that you're a nerd, but I'm certainly a nerd.
I can't deny it. Like, did I tell the one about where I went with a suit to Linux World? Because that one's hilarious. It's a long time ago, but like, I do a Linux engineer, and I went to one of those Linux World conferences in the Netherlands, and I wore a suit. Now, an engineer never wears a suit. Like, we don't wear suits. It's like, I don't wear a suit when I go to an interview because they won't take me seriously. It's like this is the level on it. But I thought it'd be funny to wear a suit to one of those conferences. And what happens is, because you wear a suit, all the salespeople think that you're the manager, which I wasn't at the time. These days I am the manager. I'm just very picky. But like, they constantly try to sell me stuff, and we're talking best friends. You get free coffee, drinks, snacks, the whole works, and stuff like that. And they just didn't realize that I was an engineer, except for the fact that I was constantly asking questions where they go, like, let me get the technical person to answer that one for you. Which, that bit was hilarious. But halfway through the day, I was just chatting with a couple of nerds that were standing there, and I think we weren't even 45, 50 seconds in or something. We were talking Lettermans, and I said, like, oh yeah, I got my Letterman in my backpack, and they just looked back at me and said, you're just wearing a suit. Like, nerds can just spot other nerds straight out. It's like, you can't hide it, because they just ask a few technical questions, and you just start rambling, and then it's like, yeah, let's go get a beer. And it's like,
it's like, yeah, you're not who I thought you were.
Yeah. I can actually have a conversation with you. It's like,
exactly.
You're one of the best feelings.
You're a normal person. Gail, good to see you. Kim, good to see you. Energy Nation, good to see you. Yusuf, also good to see you. And have I streamed HTML? No, because I watched it about 3 o'clock this morning or last night, depending on whatever way you look at it. And yeah, I was just going through real basics HTML, which actually is essentially Markdown, but just different tags, which is much easier than I thought it was going to be honest. CSS is probably the next one. Sorry?
HTML and stuff like that is not bad. It's like, what we maybe should do is like have like a live session where you try to code something and I'm just sitting back, and then when you have questions, you can just ask them straight away instead of having to Google everything.
I didn't have to do that with the HTML, but I can see that coming when I'm going through. I'm like, why is that there? Okay, I have my Google over there. Ask this question. Okay, now I can come back to here. Like, yeah, I see that. Or the stupid error boxes. Like,
HTML is the worst.
So HTML I didn't find that difficult, but a couple of the other languages where, like, even just Notion with the error boxes, I'm like, what? And I can just imagine what coding is like.
Coding is mostly shouting at yourself and Googling answers. I mean, Stack Exchange is the default web page to have open. It helps a lot once you get like into the professional side of it, because then you have peers. So you have people that you can ask for questions and people that peer review your code. So you write something and then somebody comes to me and says like, that's a pretty neat 10-line code, but we already have a function for that. You could have done that in one word. Right, that was half my afternoon. But thank you for telling me. Now I won't have to spend this much time next time when I'm writing this stuff. So it's like a live and learn. And I think that definitely with coding, you should always know that there's someone out in the world that can do it in less code than you.
Yep, and I've noticed that with formulas as well, with Notion formulas. Whenever I put a formula out, some of the older formula videos that I put out, I now know how to make shorter, but obviously I put them out like 3 months ago. So that was the knowledge I had at that point. And I get comments now that like, you could do it like this, or you could do it like that. And I'm like, I know I could, but the video was made 3 months ago and I didn't know that then. They've probably learned that stuff after I've made the video and then gone back to comment. I'm like,
This is like the worst pain that we have as a YouTuber. Once we upload something, you can't change it. You can't put an addendum on it. You can't just switch out a scene or put like a little text box over it that says like, I know how to fix it. It's over there.
You got to put it in the pinned comment and no one ever reads it. They just go past the pinned comment, make their comment, and you're like, you have to scroll past my response already or read one of the responses from the same comment.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've hit the time where YouTube's actually sent out the live stream. So people are here that want to be here. Privacy with apps. This is something that I get asked a lot. And when I did the Q&A on Notion, I got asked a lot about the security and the privacy side behind Notion. I have read their procedures and policies. I don't understand half of it, but I've read it. Can you explain a little bit for like a layman, because I am a layman when it comes to privacy and security, what it actually means when it comes to the cloud storage, local data, arguments backwards and forwards, that sort of thing?
Yeah. So like the first thing, the two things are separate. Like security is to make sure that nobody gets access to your stuff. And then the privacy is the bit that guarantees that whatever you put into the system isn't read by the company or spread to other people. So privacy, for example, plays a huge role in WhatsApp, because there they increased the security by encrypting everything because they wanted to protect people's privacy. Because before that, it wasn't encrypted and the NSA was just tapping the lines to the WhatsApp station and just reading what everybody was saying. The day that they introduced something like that was, I basically woke up that day, read the news, and I was going like, they did what? They just enabled encrypt. Somebody at the NSA is crying today. Like, a whole boardroom is probably crying. That's 10 billion people that you suddenly can't track anymore. So, yeah, those two things are, of course, tied together, because you need high security so that you can promise somebody high privacy. Privacy is usually a large part red tape. It's a lot of mumbo jumbo and a lot of text that you need to read. I once read through the whole section of Google, and Google actually has privacy statements that say that accessing your Gmail can only be done by 5 people at Google. They've engineered it in such a way that only 5 people can actually get to your mail. And then if they do it, then you get like a notification that they're going to access your mail. Of course, they have limitations, because as a company situated in the USA, they can actually get like the government coming to them saying like, you're not allowed to tell, but we do want to have access to the files, and they'll probably have to comply, and they can't say it anywhere. But they are trying to basically engineer their way around it by making it impossible. This is something all these VPN companies do that we're advertising for. They take your traffic and they send it through, and then they toss it away. Now, that means that from a privacy standpoint, it helps, because people can't go back into your log files, because they come to this VPN and they say, well, we don't keep those, because if we kept them, we had to give them right now, and that would be our business model. So no logging here. But on the other hand, the same people can, the same government can come to this company and say, like, I want to track all the data that Danny's throwing through his VPN. And from that point on, when you're using the VPN, they can still track it, because that's a bit of the security layers that are behind it. So there's always ways around it. And I think that in most cases, we're trying to make a balance between, can we keep our privacy strong and accepting that people are always reading. I mean, I always joke about the fact that I've got home automation out China. So basically anything I do in this house gets sent to China in some way or another. But I also block it in one way, because the one device that they all have to go through before they can't access the internet. But I made sure that the one device that they have to talk to, that talks to the internet, that's called Homey, and that's made by a Dutch company, by guys that can actually call, because they're students, and I was in their Kickstarter project, and they had a barbecue, which was really nice. So I trust that little globe in the house. That's the one that I would never, from my security standpoint, get any Wi-Fi enabled device from China, with the exception of a doorbell thing that I once got to try out, which I was very wary about, and also was very much calling back to China, because if somebody rang my doorbell, it took like 5 minutes before it was done sending all the video to China before my phone started ringing. It was horrible. I stopped using that soon after, because clear, like, if you get anything internet enabled from China, be wary. That's just my ground rule.
Okay, I have so many questions. I have so many questions. Okay, I guess the first question is, you say they dump the data. Where does it go? What do they do with it? Is it just they erase all the files? I don't know. Like, the dark web to me is just a mystery. So it has that got anything to do with security and privacy, or is it just deleted? Like, where does it go? What happens to it?
Okay, so like, we have to separate a few things. Like, well, let's start with the privacy bit and what happens to your data when you're online. So when you put something in Notion, it needs to be stored somewhere. This is and their privacy policy means that nobody except you or the people you share it to gets access to it. That takes a bit of the care of the privacy bit. But of course, there's data that gets stored, which for Notion means that it goes into a database, and their system that is around it makes sure that only you can access it. And then we have something which is called encryption at rest, which means that the final step is that if that database gets stopped or backupped or anything, like where it's not in use, because if it's in use, you need to decrypt it, else you couldn't read your pages. But anything else, it's encrypted, meaning that Notion has a key somewhere, and if we're lucky, and that depends a bit on how they implement it, there's a key per person, and usually most companies, it's like a global key that they use to encrypt everything, which is part of automation. If we're talking the dumping of data, like, it's engineering. So like with a VPN, they engineer it so that the data never gets stored anywhere. It's like it gets immediately sent to like what we call it def null on Linux. It's a device that you can write stuff to, but it doesn't get stored anywhere. It just gets obliterated straight away. So usually if they have log files, they send it to that device, and that it means that it never existed, meaning that they can't give it to somebody else. If you're talking dark web is a bit trickier, because the dark web is basically a layer on top of the internet or under the internet, depending on how you want to look at it. And what the dark web does is that you use something like Tor, for example, to try and hide your identity, so that people can build sites that have dubious content, because you still need to put it somewhere on the internet. And I put like a site up and I sell like stuff for medicinal purposes, let's call it like that. If I put that up on the internet and I just put it with my local internet provider, then within the month, I'll probably get like a nice call from the Dutch government, at least the police on my door, saying like, hey, you're doing illegal activity. We're bringing your site down and we're bringing you in, and I have a very bad time. So that's something I want to avoid. And with the dark web, what you do is that I still put it on the same spot. It's like still on, it needs to be hooked up to the internet, except my server doesn't tell it's doing that. And then it uses something like Tor, which is a layered thing. I mean, if you ever heard about Tor, do you know what it is?
I've come across it, but it's one of those things where I recognize it when someone says it, but that's the extent of my knowledge.
Okay, so the Tor logo is an onion, and that's what it does. It puts like layers around you, and what it means is that they put like in between hops. So if I want to get something from that illegal site, or somebody wants to get something from my illegal site, but it could also be for legal purposes. Tor was originally designed to keep people anonymous that might get tracked by other evil intentions. So it's a two-headed, like it's a double-edged sword. That's the word I was looking for. Anyhow, so what happens is that you talk to somebody at random in this network. They talk to somebody else at random in that network. That person talks to another person random in that network, and that person talks to the endpoint. And then it keeps track of that path that was made, and then eventually it goes back. But I believe it does a few things that I've read the white paper on it too long ago, but it does a few tricks to make sure that basically those people don't know where they need to go. And very often it takes two different paths. So imagine that you have like a classroom with kids in it, and they are not talking to each other, because if they were talking to each other, this whole thing would fall flat. You would give like there's Tommy on the other side of the room, and you're on the closest side, and you just like to the child to your right, you give like this and say like, this needs to get to Tommy eventually. And they just give it to a couple of kids. And the fifth kid in the row doesn't know who originally gave them the paper, because she didn't see me give the paper to the first kid. They just know it needs to go to Tommy. So they keep giving it until it gets to Tommy. Tommy looks at it, goes like, here's like the secret message that I didn't want anybody to tell. Nobody knows what Tommy does. He just got the message. And he gives it to somebody else and says like, this needs to go to Bus. And it goes to another 5-6 kids. And of course, like the third kid in the row doesn't know that it came from Tommy. Just know that it had to go to Bus. So like, and that's how Tor works. It travels through the network, but it doesn't know where it came from. It just knows where it's going to go to. And they put layers around it. So this is something which security does. It layers it in. So actually, the third kid doesn't know it needs to go to Bus. It just needs to know that it needs to go to some random kid that happens to be in the middle, that has the way to open the message and go like, oh, it needs to go to Bus, and then gives it on to something. So you should see like I put it in an envelope, and then put another envelope in it, another envelope, and on every envelope has a name of a kid in it. And the kids don't know what it came from or where it went to, and that's how you hide it. Now, there's a whole technical way on how to solve this, and I have no idea how to really easily explain it, but the simplified version is giving the message through a couple of people that don't know where it came from or where it needs to go through. They just know the next kid that it needs to go through.
Kind of like Chinese whispers.
Yeah, it's a similar setup. So that
or whatever it's called and wherever you're from.
Yeah. And then when you talk about the dark web, that's a part of the internet that's on that one that's mostly used for the shady side of that business set. And of course, like any dealings that you do with a criminal background, there's of course some rules, but not all rules are followed. And let's face it, these people are not trying to follow the law, so they're pretty creative. I mean, if you buy something through the dark web on a store and you pay with your own credit card, then don't be surprised if you're paying a lot more than you're anticipating for. And if you're lucky, you actually get some stuff. So you need to take a few precautions to get stuff done. It's also one of the reasons why things like Bitcoin are very popular on these systems, because Bitcoin allows you to have like a trust relationship without actually knowing the person, because they have a similar setup in the blockchain. I may have bought a few things through time with Bitcoin. It's
okay. Andy's asked a question in chat. So Notion is vulnerable and there is a chance that one day our data can leak. So my understanding of the dark web that you've just explained is that the dark web is separate because Notion is stored on a public server. So no one can inadvertently hack through the dark web into its separate thing, and they'd have to hack to Notion.
No, that's not how it would work. Okay. Like if you want to hack Notion, you go outside the dark web, because Notion is part of the normal web. And that way, the best way to hack it would be to go through the normal web. Actually, 9 out of 10 times, the best way to hack it, in case of Andy's, is to hack Andy's computer and then get access to Notion. I'm assuming in this case that Andy runs Windows, and usually what you do is like you take like 10,000 people using Notion. you find the person that's least protected. So a person like me that's either running Linux or a fully closed off firewalled Windows, well, I'm not the usual target, because it's like that's too much effort. But that's not how this works. People want to get access to certain data, so they try to find the weakest link and then they get into there, which is the same problem I have with my WordPress site, because I run WordPress site for multiple people, and there's always a site that doesn't get updated frequently enough. And then at some point somebody gets in, and they have multiple sites, so at some point somebody breaks it.
That's interesting. So the hacker essentially goes into the weakest link of the chain to then get in. So I assume Notion have to protect the weakest link.
Yes. And one of the ways that they do that, of course, is because they're using a web browser with HTTPS access, so that encrypts the definition going from and back and front with SSL certificates. Always keep track of that little check mark on the top of your browser, because that thing's very important. Because if that one doesn't match up with the one from Notion, then most browsers these days give you like a big warning. But then you can do something which is called the man-in-the-middle attack, which means that somebody tries to sit between you and Notion and just know what you're exchanging, because you can check whatever you're sending or receiving from Notion. This is what SSL does, right? It has like a third trusted party that both parties say, like, Notion goes to this trusted party and says, I'm Notion. And you go to the same trusted party and say, is this Notion? And it says, yes, that's Notion. And then you know that you can trust it. That's to keep it safe in traffic. And then I said, the weakest link is the end user. You can't really change that. I mean, the safest way to access something like Notion will probably be your phone, because phones were designed to be safer. Like PCs are not as safe as phones, because the Windows PC system wasn't designed for an internet world, the original Windows PC. And Microsoft is still backwards compatible to like Windows 95, most of the things, which I think is a hard job, and I'm amazed that they can do it. But at the same time, that also limits it. And then most of the protection on your Windows system comes from your browser, which over time has become more and more sandboxed. So for example, I'm using StreamYard right now, but StreamYard can't access my other tabs on my browser because they're totally separate, which is something which is called cross-site scripting. And that was usually the most effective way to get to somebody's data before all these protections were set up, where they tried to get a site set up that you would access, and then that would drop some information in there that they could use to start JavaScript. And with JavaScript, they would access one of your other browsers, and then the other browser, they could read the data. These days, they try to avoid that by having those cross-site scripts disabled. But we still like cross-site scripting, because one of the things that we do with Notion, for example, is we embed other websites. And then people automatically get to the question, how can this other website access my Notion? Hence the cross-site. And then you want to have that in a secure way, and you don't want your browser to do it. And I don't think that I think at some point we messed with the CSS, and I messed with somebody else with CSS. They was asking questions, and he was using like an extension that could access both Notion and another site, and then used JavaScript to connect those two. But that extension had access to both websites.
So the Notion enhancer accesses Notion's something, because that obviously has themes. It has dark themes, and it changes some of the aesthetics, which I'm guessing is CSS or JavaScript or a combination of, to give you the weekly view, etc. So how do they access Notion without getting access to everyone else's stuff?
Yeah. So once you install an extension in Chrome, Edge, Firefox, whatever, it will tell you what sites it needs access to. A nice example for that one is Toggle, for example, which I use for time tracking, which needs access to a lot of sites. And what they do is that in the extension, I have to specify which sites they need access to, and then Google pops up and tells me like, hey, are you okay with this site accessing all these subsites? And that's what an extension does, right? If you have a Notion extension site, it will probably say something like, I need to be able to read and change all the sites that run on Notion.so. Here's the part, once you start using an extension like that, you're opening yourself to risk, because if somebody were able to change that extension, they automatically also get access to your full Notion, because that's what the extension does.
So is that what people call a backdoor? Is that what it is?
That's a backdoor. Like if you install a backdoor in like a Notion extension, somebody else installs the extension, and then after they've done that, they can open it and basically read anything. So this week, I saw that the Great Suspender, which was an extension I used for a long time, got disabled by Microsoft Edge because they got bought up by a larger company, and that one added malware to it, meaning that you get all these extra advertisers and stuff through the extension. Considering the fact that the Great Suspender had access to all my browser windows, that's risky business. Luckily, the Great Suspender only has access to the loading and not the actual content, which limits it a bit.
Right.
But you can see how something like that, like if you give like an extension that kind of access.
So I'm guessing that's so what Gail said, that that's probably what I was thinking. So that, I mean, I don't know about you guys watching, but I'm learning a lot. Okay. So I'm just thinking, so when it comes to extensions or new applications, so I know there's been a question when it comes to embedding videos and embedding websites and stuff into Notion or into insert application. I know, for example, Obsidian use iframe. I don't know what that is, but they use iframe to embed YouTube videos into the Obsidian Markdown file somehow. Again, still new to code. Does the embedding process themselves create a backdoor, or is that just them changing something in the surface?
So like embedding a website with iframe is pretty secure these days. I'm a bit like as I see Gail's questions, I want to answer that one to him and then dive into iframes, which is
go for
super interesting. So Notion Handler no longer works on my Mac because of security settings. That could very well be it. So I'm not sure about the backstory behind Notion Enhancer, but I do know that Apple is pretty fanatical on like blocking extension and stuff like that when they think that they might have a trouble or like a problem going on there, which is good. But they should, of course, communicate why. So, for example, with the Great Suspender, I get like a nice message saying like Edge is blocking this because it's on that block list. One Google later, I know why. So with the Notion Enhancer, I would need to do a little bit of research to find out why it was blocked. And then maybe I could explain about it by diving into that. Now, to get back to the iframes a bit, for that one for Gil, like, is it okay if I would like do like a quick Google, because I just want to know now? It's like
yeah, go for it.
See what I can get. So Notion Enhancer.
Yeah, because I was exploring the GitHub of the GitHub profile. I'm new to that as well, and saw that there's quite a few contributors to it as well. Mm-hmm. And as soon as I saw that, I was thinking, okay, so 12 people have access to some or all of the code, I'm not sure, which is suddenly installed on my computer, which potentially gives them access to Notion. Confused how this works. I mean, I've done it anyway. I've used it, didn't like it, so I got rid of it.
Which tool were you talking about? Because we also have reading like on the Notion Enhancer bit.
Well, are you talking about what I was? So what
you were talking about there?
Yeah, the Notion Enhancers having multiple contributors, assuming they all have access to the code, potentially giving them all access to adding something to the extension, which could then be like the backdoor in type thing, because it's a public repository, if I'm getting the words right.
That's correct. Let's see. I'll share my screen because I got the public repository open at the moment. Let's see if I can.
Yeah, if you share your screen down the bottom, it's screen, not video. They've recently added a thingy. And Yusuf, I do see your question, and Gail, I see your question beforehand as well. Andy, I also see your question. I will go through those in a second. I see Andy's two questions. Have you got the share screen? I was
already afraid I would just share my whole screen, but I have this massive screen these days, so that doesn't work. But I can luckily pick one. So, I've got the GitHub open right now. So this is like Notion Enhancer's GitHub, and this means that Notion is open source. Now, open source does not mean that everybody can just make changes to it. So you don't have to be worried about malware getting into this. It works by what we call a peer review system, meaning that if somebody makes a change and they say, I want to add code, they send it to the people that are maintaining the Notion enhancer, which I can probably see here. Like, you see contributors here, like these are the people that put code into it and who are working on it. But that doesn't mean that all the contributors are allowed to give access. Now, I've been working with GitLab lately, so I don't know exactly where it is, but if I would click through it, then somewhere it says like these are the maintainers. And usually there are 2 to 4 people that basically are standing at the door saying like this change gets in and this change doesn't. And here we see pull requests, and these are changes. So people that saying like, hey, I would like to fix this. Let's pick a random one. And what we do here is then this one says like, hey, I just want to make a change to the code and I want to set the font size to 14. So the person that maintains the code looks at this, goes like, okay, that's not malware. That's just putting the font size in there, and then can say approve. Of course, I don't have the button because I'm not a Notion enhancer maintainer, but they have like a merge button so they can approve and merge it. And that's how this open source code is written. Now, the worst thing that can happen is somebody sneaks like a backdoor into that. And then on one end, you say like, okay, everybody can make a patch. So it's very easy to get like a backdoor in that. But it also means everybody can see the code. So a lot of people are checking to see if there's backdoors in it. If something is very popular, then a lot of people always are keeping like a keen eye on it, because there's people that are more fanatic than me that would.
I would imagine there'd be some people proofreading every letter, every character.
And it still happened, like, because it's, if a lot of code goes through a system, it can still happen. But remember that like Linux, the kernel, which is what my laptop runs on, that in its complete sense is open source built. And if anybody would be able to get like a security bug in there or a backdoor, they would be, that would be bad for the world in general. So looking at these codes, there's like a check and balance system to get code in. And it's also super nice because it also means that if you're using Notion Enhancer, you can also see why they get blocked and you can dive in it. So one of the things that I was looking at and why I'm going to like their GitHub website is because if it says like it's blocked on Mac, then usually there's an issue somewhere that says like system doesn't work on Mac anymore and what can I do to fix that? But I couldn't quickly find anything else. So I have to dive deeper on that one. I'm going to put that on my task list to find out because I want to know now.
Okay, awesome. I mean, we've got tons of questions. So let's go to Yusuf's question up here. Who would you recommend Linux to? What distro is the best for the beginners? Now, I know there are some Linux users in the chat or watching the replay that already use Linux and have explained some things to me about what it is. So yeah, expand a little bit on that question and as well as what Linux is in comparison to Mac and Windows, because I think a lot of people know Mac and Windows and Linux is like this thing
on the side. Yeah. So when it comes to Linux, it used to be like it was more for the engineer type, but to be honest, I had my grandma running on Linux at some point, so it's not that hard anymore. As to who I would recommend it to, I think you need to turn the question around these days, and that's who I wouldn't recommend it to. So like, I wouldn't recommend it to people that do a lot of video editing. One of the reasons why my main system is running Windows is because it gets kind of fed up switching between Linux and Windows all the time. To be fair, all the tools that I'm using, DaVinci Resolve, Blender, Inkscape, the GIMP, it all runs on Linux. It's all software that I could just as well run on the Linux side. The only reason I switched was because DaVinci Resolve on Linux, the non-paid version, didn't support H.264, and that's basically what comes out of all my cameras, like my phone, my Canon, the webcam, whatever. So that was just too painful to deal with. Also, I got friends and I like gaming. Gaming is still like a hard one, but it's not as bad as it used to be. It used to be that like for gaming, you didn't use Linux. My current desktop I used for a year before switching to Windows due to my YouTube endeavors. And I was gaming 90% of the time on Linux because Steam is amazing for Linux gaming. It's like that I can get in the whole ballpark onto why they did that and how amazing that is for Linux users, but it's not because they want to support Linux, it's because they want to make sure that Apple and Microsoft don't turn on some thumb screws later. As the best distro for beginners, talking distros, and if you get Linux engineers here, you can talk for days, but my basic would be Ubuntu still, because Ubuntu is one of the first distros that really tried to get to this point where anybody can do it.
Very quickly, what is a distro?
That's a good one. So let's hop one back, because this is decades ago that I had to figure out what a distro was. But like a distro, like Linux and all the software that comes with it, you can build that from scratch. There's actually a project called Linux from Scratch where you just compile everything and you put it all together and you can build your own distro. I wouldn't recommend this to anyone sane. Insane, maybe, but sane, no. Because it takes forever and you need to know a lot. If you want to get to that level, I would prefer to go to Gentoo, which I did install at some point, because they take the whole compilation bit for you. You have to do like a lot of tweaking and buttons and stuff. What Gentoo, Ubuntu, Red Hat, and all these other things do is that they combine all these packages for you and make them work together. So basically do all the hard work of getting all this software together and getting it working. So why I recommend Ubuntu is because that was the goal Ubuntu initially had. They had two goals, these two things that I really appreciate about them. One, they made the install painless. Where a decade ago, you could install Ubuntu. I could give it to anyone and they could install it. Anybody that tells me that they can't install Linux are lying. Because I can give the distro to you, Danny, and you have it installed in 10 minutes flat. It's just next, type in your name, say use the main hard drive, and it does all the work for you, and you're done.
I like that.
It's very well done. The other thing that Ubuntu did, which was amazing, was that they had community guidelines. Now, this doesn't sound very special in 2021, like we have community guidelines everywhere.
You're going to say 2020 then.
Yeah, but if you're talking 2005, I think, is that 2005? Maybe it's even before that, like 2005-ish, Ubuntu came to the scene and they had community guidelines, meaning that if people were new to Linux and they started with Ubuntu and they went online for help, instead of getting told what a noob they were and that they couldn't even get their compilations upset, you just download the Linux kernel, you run CMake, you run a couple compilers, make sure you set the 15-bit flags right, and that will work fine. Ubuntu actually went like, and Ubuntu went like, no, it should work out of the box for somebody, and if it doesn't work out of the box for someone, or like it doesn't work easily, that's a bug, and we either need to fix it if we can fix it, or we help people in the kindest way possible. So of course it doesn't always work, people and stuff like that, but most of the time, if you came as a total noob, because the community guidelines, the community was welcoming to newcomers. I taught Ubuntu back in the day to seniors, which means you need a lot of patience. And I believe part of my YouTube explanation comes from that side, because that once you learn to teach it to someone who's really trying to learn something new and hasn't even learned how a mouse works yet, you can explain anyone anything. And that's what Ubuntu does. It's welcoming and helps you out if it doesn't work. There's one thing that I stopped at some point, because I had people that came to me and they had like, it doesn't work with my network card or something like that. And with a laptop, of course, there's a problem, but they also had like desktops. And I was like, okay, you just got a free operating system. If you're going to go and buy Microsoft, you need to pay $200 for it. And you're telling me that the fact that your network card isn't working is for you a showstopper, and you can get a perfectly fine working network card for 10 euros at the local computer store, and that will just run out of the box. So that's one of the things, of course, like I don't have any Linux problems, because when I buy a system, I check if it's Linux compatible. And 9 out of 10 times it is, because Linux runs on nearly everything. But there's a few things in my house, for example, like I'm talking to you right now and I'm using a Focusrite, and I know that one doesn't work on Linux. It is that I'm using Windows now for my YouTube videos, else I wouldn't have bought it. Now it was just like, okay, get the best tool for the job. I know that Stream Deck doesn't work on Linux, for example, which is also one of those things that I know that I would need to tweak and get it to working on Linux to get that going there. And for most end users, like if you just want to browse the web, so you do 90% of your browser, which happens if you use something like Notion and WhatsApp and Gmail and stuff like that, Linux is an excellent choice. If you just throw it on your laptop, it runs, you don't need to think about it, it updates everything in the background these days. It already did that way before Microsoft and Mac came to the scene. Because what distros did, they had like a package system. And Chrome, for example, even plays nice with that system. So that means like in Windows, lots of programs, and I really hate that. It grinds my... All these programs that talk to me say like, you need to update my program. I'm going like, why? Why do I need to click on these 15 buttons to upgrade everything? Because in Linux, you just go to your software manager, you say upgrade everything, and it upgrades my Chrome browser, it upgrades all the software I had. It doesn't ask me anything, and then it just keeps going. One of the things that I really liked about Ubuntu, and I wish other operating systems would use that, is that Ubuntu has one core rule that says that you don't interrupt the user. And you don't know how good that feels to have an operating system that has no pop-ups ever. Because if there's a pop-up, that's a bug that needs to get fixed. It gets fixed. Things don't pop up. And there are small design things that now I'm back on Windows. Slack, for example, I get like a notification and that pops up like on the corner of your screen.
Yep.
And for some reason, I always need to be in that corner when that pop-up comes there. It's like I'm typing something, I'm willing that this pop-up comes up, and I'm like, all right, what do I do now? Like, how do I get rid of it? There's no cross on it. I can only click on it, but I don't want to open the program. And it just mind boggles me. And then I'm going like, why didn't I have this problem in Ubuntu? And then I realized that in Ubuntu, they also have pop-ups, but they made them so that you can't interact with them. So it pops up. If your mouse goes over the pop-up, it disappears. It just fades out, and you can work behind it.
All my notifications are on my phone to completely avoid any pop-ups on my screen. Like,
yeah, well, I think that's the best thing. Yeah.
Anything like all of like the Discord, the Slack, like anything that's going to give me a pop-up notification is on my phone, and my phone is always muted. So I turn my phone on. Oh, there's 100 and something pop-up notifications. But yeah. So when it comes to Linux, Mac, Windows comparison for security and privacy, is there much of a difference?
Not as much as it used to be. It used to be that like Windows was a real pain to keep maintaining stuff, but Microsoft really stepped up at some point. I mean, I still think that having like a virus scanner and a firewall on your system is more of a stopgap. It's like, hey, our system isn't 100% secure, so here's something to scan for it and fix it. But it's a lot better than not doing anything about it. Also, of course, Microsoft is a large target, so I definitely get why they need to do it. Linux, for example, by default doesn't have a firewall or a virus scanner because it's designed to be multi-user. So you yourself, if you're using it, you're very limited in what you can do with the operating system. I need to always switch to like the super user. Yeah, no pop-ups is like the dream, Gail. That's just, I miss that. I miss that a lot. That's like the one thing I'm going like, oh my God, if only I get that back. And it's not. It's like my printer coming with the pop-up saying like, hey, your ink is low. Yeah, sure. You could have just put that in the system tray and just put an icon over that. You didn't need to stop me from working for that. It's like, yeah. I mean, I'm getting in like a rant territory. Like
pop-ups. We've got enough.
Yeah. So if I'm heading towards rant territory, this is the moment that I break out the whiskey. But yeah, the pop-ups bit, and as said, I really wish Microsoft at some point would just make that a rule. Just say like, hey, if you want to be part of our operating system, then you need to stop bothering your end users. On the other hand, from a usability standpoint, I have worked with end users. I've worked help desk. If you don't tell them upfront that you don't put stuff in screen, a lot of people wouldn't do anything. They wouldn't maintain their system. So while on one end, I find it super annoying that Windows keeps telling me that I need to reboot, I'm already glad that it gives me an option and doesn't spontaneously reboot like it used to do. I mean,
yeah, that was so annoying.
Yeah, oh my God. Like
it did it to me earlier today, and that was partly my fault, but I completely neglected the pop-up. It came up, it said, because I updated, I can't remember, I think it was like Affinity Photo, there was an update. I did it, and it was like, the system needs a reboot. When do you want to do it? And it had defaulted to in 5 minutes, but I didn't sort of like acknowledge it at the time. I was like, in 5 minutes, yeah, sure. Dropped it down. I was like halfway through editing the thumbnail for this live stream, and then boom, down. I was like, what just happened? I was like, we had a power cut. What's going on? And I was like, oh yeah, the update. Completely closed everything down and rebooted. I was like, okay.
And it's funny that you mentioned it because that's one of the main, from a security standpoint, but also from a usability standpoint, a problem. If you give people constant pop-up boxes, they start auto-ignoring it. So our brains are wonderful things. Like what you did there is like you just hit like the go away button, and then the go away button became like a permanent problem.
Remind me later.
Yeah. Later came in 5 minutes. So that's like why you don't want all these pop-ups. You want, if a pop-up comes up in your screen, it really needs to be for something which really means you need to stop what you're doing now. And if it doesn't happen that often, you suddenly find that a lot more important than when it used to be. Like if on Ubuntu I got a pop-up screen, it's like, what happened? Why is this thing in my screen? And I just get jogged out of it. To give an example, rebooting in Ubuntu, there's a power button on the corner of your screen that's used for shut down and reboot and log out and stuff like that. And the only thing that happens when you need to do a kernel update, which is the only time that you need to reboot, is it turns red. I've had that thing red for 2 months because I was too busy working, where it was going like, it would be great if you would reboot me at some point. Like, yeah, sure, man, later.
Yeah, okay.
And that's just like a nice way. Let's see the questions, because
yeah, I know what you mean. It's just yeah. So this, I've had my mouse over this question for a while. So one of the best protections is to make it more work for the hacker. They want the least amount of friction to get in.
Yeah. This is like, it reminds me of like one of the greatest ironies. So you know what the first thing is that happens to your system once you get hacked?
No.
It gets more secure. Because the first thing the hacker does is make sure that no other hackers can get in.
That makes sense.
It's ridiculous, but it's true. Like, you got botnets. So what they try to do is they try to hack your Windows so they can get 10,000 Windows PCs that are hacked to do like a DDoS attack. So they all get to the same site at the same time. Now, the only way you can do that if you have like a lot of PCs all over the world that would just all instantaneously at the same time do stuff. And what those people do is they try to get into your system. And the first thing they do once they're in the system is go like, okay, firewalls up, more protection, and then make sure that nobody else can get in, because this is my system now. It's like you get like a mafia protection racket going on there. The only problem, of course, is that your system is hacked and that suddenly your CPU starts spiking because they're using it to mine Bitcoin. It's like, but that's like the other thing around. But yeah, you need to make yourself like more work. And it's not that you need to do a lot, but it's mostly just the basics. Like a firewall, for example, the main thing, the reason why we run a firewall is to make sure that only the ports that are actually used by programs are open. Now, these days, now we get into firewall territory. Like if you're at your home network, your router is actually your firewall. That's the thing that actually is attached to the internet. That's the one that gets all the flack. Poor thing.
That's interesting.
Your PC can't access the internet, or it can't be accessed from the internet.
So if someone was to hack the router to the home, it would be everyone's computer that's compromised, essentially, rather than one?
It wouldn't take that long, because, well, of course, your computer is protected, so it wouldn't be trivial. But because most computers would assume that the router isn't hacked, so that they're in like a secure network, that would mean that the protection is lower on it. So most systems, you try to close as many gates as you need, because 9 out of 10 times you don't need any incoming connections. That's only if you're hosting something. It's like, I don't know if you know about Plex, but Plex is like a way that you can share media. So like I can stream media from my PC to my TV downstairs. That one needs an actual open port, because if I'm at my friend's house and I want to watch a movie there, that's on my Plex, or I want to preview one of my Tools on Tech videos, because I also put those on the Plex, because then my friends can watch them before I put them live. Then their TV with their smart functions need to be able to go over the internet, talk to my router, go like, hey, did you, I need to talk to the Plex guy. And then the router goes like, that's this port, yes. And then you go through and you get access to my desktop. And this is one of the greatest and worst things that are out there. It's called UP&P, and it's called Universal Plug and Play. It's pretty old by these standards. But what it means is that your PC can talk to your router and say like, hey, I got this app running on this port. Can you make sure that the rest of the world can access that, because I need it? And it's a wonderful feature, because it means that we can play video games in multiplayer, because somebody is the server, somebody's hosting. So what happens then is that the game talks to the router, says like, hey, can you open ports 5,000 X, whatever, somewhere between 1 and 65,000. And then all the other players get told where they need to connect to, what port, and then the router lets them through and they can access your PC and you can play your game together. So that's when you want that access. But if you have a hacker that gets access to your PC, it does exactly the same thing. It goes to the router and goes like, hey, can you open this port, because I really want these friendly guys on the other side of Russia to get in here and have a chat on my server. They won't always do it. these days, because the problem with the UPnP thing is if I go to my router, I can see all the ports that are open. And if I see something that's not supposed to be there, that's a pretty smoking gun kind of problem. Like, okay, so one system is, and because I can not only see what port is open, but I can also see what system it's pointing to, the first thing that I would do is just unplug that system and then start digging in it to figure out what was running on said port. So what they do these days is that they usually just don't use the UPnP and they just ping. So they talk from inside to out. Because one of the tricks that they do is that once you, if you want to talk, like if I want to send data to Notion, I don't open ports so Notion can access my system. I go to Notion and I get my information. And that's what they do as well. They talk to a central agency and say like, hey, do you get any work for me? And then the agency says, like, I got work for you. You need to like DDoS this server at 10 a.m. Tonight. And then they store that, and then they wait, and then they do it. And there's all this constant back and forth because you don't want to over-text the PC because then people start noticing and they start taking action. But you do want to have like keep control over it. So it's like this whole mystifying web. I mean, you ever play Pandemic? Let's, the Pandemic of a Plague Inc. I think it is.
Yeah, I've played that.
Yeah, so it's a bit like that. You don't want to make it immediately apparent that it's super deadly because then people start, solving the problem, and you don't want to do that. So they always try to balance it a bit, and most people don't notice. I mean, I immediately notice because I'm a stiffler for PC performance. If my PC performance goes like down a tidbit, like, who's that? And get me the task manager. And I start checking out whatever is using my resources.
My computer. My computer's always like 98%.
I still don't get how you keep up. Like you're like, yeah, it works fine. I'm just going like.
It only takes me 3 hours to render a video. And I'm not even joking, it's like 3.5 hours to render like a 7-minute video. It's on my phone when my computer's going.
My God. Like, here I am complaining if it takes more than 10 minutes. It's like...
Just do it. I mean, it's it's like small little squirrel moments, a side tangent. The amount of people that make excuses in YouTube forums are like, oh, this doesn't work, or that doesn't work, or my tech this, or my tech that. I'm sitting there like, right, okay. I live streamed without a camera, my webcam. Like, you've seen like building a second brain live stream. You look at you're like, is that Danny? I can't tell. It's like 4 pixels. Like my computer's running at 98% almost all the time. I have an external hard drive that's 1 terabyte. That's literally every single piece of memory I have, like digital memory. And then there's John with like 40 something terabytes worth of memory in his PC. Like, I need another storage drive. I'm like, what? How? Where?
How? Where do you keep it? Stuff like that. Well, I'm just as bad because like I got way too much gear hanging around me. So like I can't say, like I'm just baffled sometimes. There's other things that I was really worried about. I mean, I heard your backup solutions and I was just going like, it's like, what? He uses YouTube as how? How can you sleep at night? It's
yeah. I mean, all my videos are on my external hard drive and on YouTube.
Yeah. Well, one of the benefits, of course, is if you have it on YouTube, like Gail talking about hey, make it worse for a hacker. If you ever heard about ransomware, where they go in and they encrypt all your stuff and then they want a credit card before they uncrypt it for you. The best fix around that is having good backups, but also to make sure that those backups can't be accessed. Else you'll find out that your backups are encrypted as well, which is very annoying for obvious reasons.
Yeah, because then you solve it on one problem and then you just put it straight back in and then you got to do it again.
So this is why I have like Transipay, which is a Dutch company that sells like storage where I sync my movies to, but I also have iDrive where I just use the backup function, and the backup function means that they can only add to it. They can't change anything that's there, which is what makes sure that even if my system would get hacked, then I usually would only lose like the last day of work, which would be annoying maybe if that would just have been my editing day, but most of the time I'll be able to handle.
That's understandable though. It's understandable. Yeah, backups is one of those things that like John he's at me on it. I mean, Notion Goth's the same, and Notion is the same. Like, they're all just, and I think Kim as well. Oh, and Gail actually. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I'm looking in chat, looking at names. I'm like, yeah, all of them want me to have a backup or more backups. Mm-hmm. but don't need it yet. So, Andy's question. Okay, more simple questions. I mean, simple questions, hard questions, any questions. Yeah. Could someone like Bass hack my Notion? I have a Mac, by the way. I would imagine to hack your Notion, they'd need to get into your system, from my understanding of what you said earlier. Is that correct?
Yeah. So then the simplest way to get into someone's Notion would be to be able to access their Notion. So then there's multiple points of attack. So someone like me might be able to get in your Notion, but there's a lot of factors, and you want to just make it hard. I guess that's the main game here. Now, the easiest way to get into someone's Notion is social engineering.
Right.
Which means that you actually call someone and ask them a few questions. So, when you get to like a site and you say like, I forgot my password, you have to fill in like your birth date and your last second cousin's dog name or something like that. I hate those questions. I hate those questions with a passion, because anybody that did any social engineering knows that it's trivial to get that information once you know who the person is. Either you can find it in public records, you can find it on their Facebook page.
I was going to say that.
Definitely not designed for this world, day and age. So if I have one of these questions, it's usually the top one, and the answer there isn't the answer to the question. The answer is a random generated code that I got in my LastPass, because I keep those things in LastPass as like a 12 random digit thing. Or it actually says like it's in your LastPass. I've also been in many discussions with companies because they said, yeah, you forgot your password. It's like, I don't forget my password. I mean, LastPass does not forget passwords. Trust me, if it started doing that, there would be hell to pay for a lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
So the only reason why you forgot my password is because you came at some point where you either had to rotate your passwords, which is actually good, but then just tell me like, hey, you didn't log into our site for the last 3 years and we rotated your password, which I can totally get behind. Except for the fact, of course, that I can just reset it by sending it to my email. So if anybody hacks my email, then I'm done for. But that counts for nearly everyone here.
Yeah. Don't mention Google crashing, because it may actually crash.
Yeah, at that point. So one tip that I can give to everyone here immediately, like if you want, make sure that your email has a different password than anything else. Just that one. Like if you use the same password for your email for something like this, change that password today. Don't wait. Do it today. Write it down on a piece of paper. I don't care, like that you don't want to forget it, because that password's probably important. Put it somewhere and enable two-factor authentication. Your mail is your number one place that people are going to try to get in. Once I get into somebody's email, I can do anything. It's just done. I can get to your bank access. I can get to your Notion. I can get to whatever site you've been. And I'm pretty sure if it's Gmail, and like me, you got Gmail from back to 2003, whatever I need, I can find it's in there. And I'm pretty sure there's some dubious mails in there because we've all lived.
Start typing with the archive. What secrets are in here?
That like the archive there's more in that archive than you want to know, because Google knew what they were doing once they started setting up that Gmail bit. But yeah, that's like the main tip. Like the other one is get a password manager, but if you don't want to get a password manager, start with that.
I was going to say, so kind of like side question that links the two things together. When it comes to Notion and their backup system storage of information, if Notion was to get hacked, would we have access to our backed up storage data or not?
We would. Like, I mean, I don't know Notion's backend, and I would love to have a chat with an engineer at some point to actually get those questions answered, because that would be tremendously fun to do.
Maybe I could try and get one on, and just like you can have a conversation with him and me just sit here going, can you explain that, please?
Yeah, like if they ever have an engineer, like, I mean, engineers love talking about this. So like if Notion has an ops engineer, then like if you say that there's whiskey, they'll be here. That's like how it works. Either that or beer.
Right, I'm going to the Slack after the stream.
Anyhow, that's fun. Like, okay, and of course they can't tell everything because there's also confidentiality and stuff like that. But most systems, they have like an offsite backup. Also, they're using Amazon. I can see that because for my last video, I was checking through their whole JavaScript set to see how they talk to their own API and stuff like that. And Amazon actually has like a pretty good backup system. So like they probably use the database that's part of the Amazon cloud. So Amazon provides the database because maintaining database is a lot of hard work. And paying a cloud provider to do all the hard work for you is a very good value proposition. Trust me, I've maintained multiple databases in my life. It's a pain. It still is at my current position. Like, yeah, it's super annoying. I mean, if you can put that to the cloud and just say like, I need a database and make sure that you keep separate backups that can be accessed, that's total win.
So is Notion stored in Amazon then?
Yes.
Okay. I assumed it was stored in somewhere, but I didn't know where. I was thinking like Google or something, but Amazon.
No, you can actually, let me share my screen with Notion and see if I can show.
You don't have to stop sharing as well, by the way. Like,
yeah, I need to share a different window because I get the Notion one here. So, but like,
oh yeah, because you've got a big computer. You're all.
It doesn't work. I need to share. This is nerds in there. Let me share the browser, because if I don't share the browser, I can't show the backend. But like the simple thing that you can do, and that's already like people complained about this one, and we're already had to correct a few people. So like if we go to Notion.
Oh wait.
Showing Notion?
I can see white. I can't quite see the screen. Yes, we're in Notion now.
It's like a white page. So like this is like a default Notion page. I don't really care in this case about where we are in Notion. I just need to be in Notion. And then I'm just going to take like a quick screenshot of your face and paste it in here.
When I wasn't paying attention.
Well, you wasn't paying attention because that's funny.
I was reading the chat and I was like, what? Oh, screenshot. Okay.
So like if you open this in Notion, you have like the button that says original.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it opens, if you look at the top bar, it says westamazon.aws.com. Now, the only type of program that would use Amazon's storage network to store images would be someone that's using Amazon. So that's why I know Notion is using Amazon Cloud Services for their solution. Also, one of the things that was mentioned at some point, people said like, yeah, this is insecure because if you this URL here, if I send that to you, you can see this picture, even though you don't have access to Notion and I didn't share the page. But that's because this one contains like a password in it. There's like a large URL in it that is unique for this. And if you share that, then people can just get to this picture. So that's by design. This also makes it that Notion or like Amazon in this case doesn't get like overrun with requests, because it's trivial to just say, I need this picture sent to person compared to I need this picture and I first need to decrypt it and then send to person. Pardon.
Okay. Interesting.
So these are things that I know. And there's also like what I said, like if you go into the network inspectors, like if I go to like underwater in a browser, I can see what the site is accessing. And it's one of the things that like I still have the API in it because that's the last thing I checked.
Is that the developer tab from like pushing F12?
Yeah. And if I use the network, this shows all the traffic that Notion is doing. And you see here the API calls that are in there. See API version 3, get page visits. Because no modern application would not use an API, because the web interface is constantly talking with Notion to get like updates on the blocks or the things that you change. Because it wouldn't work if you would, every time we would type in a letter, Notion would have to send the whole page up and down.
Right.
And you should be able to see it because like it's now monitoring. So let's see if I can make this. Basically, if anything happens, if Notion is talking to the backend, this thing starts moving on the top here. I'm going to show that like we're going to refresh. You see this like moving?
Yeah.
And that's because Notion is like my website is talking to Notion. So if I go in here, if I wait till it stops a bit and I start typing, then it will start constantly sending messages up and down.
Nice. I like it. Insight into the back end of how websites and stuff work. Okay, I'm like mentally remembering this for like when I'm learning stuff.
Well, if you're doing any HTML and stuff like that, then of course you need this constantly to figure out what's happening. Most of the reasons why people open a network tab is either to debug why things are slow, because it shows you the exact timing, and the bars on the top show you why things are taking long. But to give an example of how this is used. Hackers, for example, if they go to a site and they try to find a way to log into the site, for Notion, for example, they type in a username and they type in a password and you press enter, and then you get back either you typed in a wrong password or a user. Now, Notion would probably not tell you that the username is wrong, because that would give valuable information to hackers, because they could, okay, this username doesn't work, let's try the next username until they found one that would work. But it gets even more interesting than that, because even if you hide that, then they check how long the response time is, because very often a site, when you log in and the username doesn't exist, it fails on the first query, because it goes like user doesn't exist, send it back. And finding someone's password, decrypting it, setting it up, takes 10 to 20 milliseconds longer. So they just look at the timing and go like, oh, like if I have a username that works, then it takes 60 milliseconds. And if it doesn't work, it takes 40 milliseconds. So if I ask it the username and I get my answer in 40, I know that this username doesn't exist. Keep trying the next one. That's how far this type of nefariousness goes. Like these people are ridiculous.
I can see that being I can certainly see that being something people would do. I mean, essentially, that's what we do with Notion, just to a completely different extent.
I'll move your face away from my shared screen, because that was the bit that I wanted to show.
Yeah, I've stopped sharing, so.
Yeah, and I have to deal with audits all the time as an infra engineer. So I get like dragged into a meeting, and then somebody checked the site, and they go over a whole list of things that are wrong. And this is one of those things that happens very often.
Okay, Andy asked an interesting question. Roam good in terms of privacy?
I haven't read the privacy of Roam.
I was going to say, I haven't read much about the privacy. All I know is Roam is very similar to, quote, other SaaS applications. So I would imagine their privacy information is probably very similar to everything else. Evernote, AmpleNote, Todoist, Trello, ClickUp, blah, 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 blah. All of the apps. I imagine they're very, very similar. I can see Bass is checking in the background.
I just want to...
All I will say is I would imagine with their pricing, there might be something there. That's maybe one way they can justify charging so much.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's hard to like do a background check, but one of the things, of course, if you're using Roam, you could do the same thing. I mean, can you upload images in Roam? Because I haven't used Roam very much of it.
Yes, yeah, you can.
Well, yeah, you can try the same trick that I did there, where you just go to the original URL of the image, and then you can see on what cloud platform they're running it. That tells you something about where it's hosted. Doesn't tell you how well they implemented it, but at least gives you a hint in the right direction. Of course, they have like a privacy segment, and of course, because it's closed, because you need to pay to get to it, it makes it a less wide target to Roam. By default, from a hacking perspective, Notion is something where you have much more possibilities to get in, because there's lots of people there that are just trying it, people that just tried it for a little bit. And with Roam, because you need to pay for it, that means that their user base is more invested, but also smaller, and that means that the attack surface is smaller in that case. One could argue, of course, that because they're paying for it, they're business customers, and that makes them inherently more valuable.
Roam research is supposedly targeted towards students because of the research, but you're like, well, students don't have as much money.
Yeah, that's like a weird.
Yeah,
like let's charge an arm and a leg for this, because students are they're bathing in money these days. I've been told.
Yeah,
swimming around in it.
That debt is really great.
Yeah. It's like you don't upgrade your laptop because it's style, right? It's like,
exactly. Okay, Kim asks, what would you say is the one thing everyone should do/use to make their Notion browser PC more secure? Of course, there are lots of things we should all keep in mind and be wary of, but what is number one?
Get a password manager.
Do you need a password manager? Because I don't use one. I have like Brain. Do you need a password manager?
Oh yeah. On the moment, I have more than 1,500 sites that I need to keep passwords of. I can't put that in my brain.
I mean, I don't know how many I have, because I have a formula to make the password.
Yeah, well, that's like better than nothing, right? Because that's like, as long as you don't have like the same password everywhere. I've seen a few of those systems and they work. One of the reasons why I highly recommend a password manager is because it makes it so trivial to do the password thing. Like if I use LastPass, I go to a site, I type in my details. I want to order something on a web store, and I click on the generate random password. It fills it in, it stores it, and I forget about it. And then I get to like the same web shop like 3 years later, and I get to that site, and LastPass pops up like, "Hey, do you want me to log in for you?" And I'm like, "Yes, please." And then if that web shop, that's definitely a tech service, because like web shops are like run by mom and pop shops sometimes, and they're small, and there's 1,000 of them, so larger tech service. Because they all have a random password. If one of those gets hacked, I'm like, yeah, so I don't care. They have one password that was unique to them. So good luck with that, buddy. Like, have at it. So that's why I would say like get a password manager, because password for everything is super important, and be finicky about it. I trust LastPass. I've done some research before I started using it. Those guys are paranoid to the max.
I'm not surprised. I mean,
yeah,
people
like
run a password manager software, obviously.
If the NSA would go to LastPass and they say, I would like to get all the passwords from Mr. Grolleman, they go like, yeah, that's cool and all, but we don't know which one of these ones is from Mr. Grolleman. Because they take my username and my password and they hash that. And out of that comes like a unique hash. And they have like this database with all the password databases in it, but they only have a hash. So they don't know which password database, encrypted and all, belongs to which person. That's how paranoid they are. That's why I use them. It's ridiculous. I was reaching like a blog post on how they set up their security, and I was going like, those guys are mental. I would never do that much. That's the guy I'm going with, and I'm pretty sure
they go way beyond what is normal. Let's do it.
That's the guys that I want to protect my password. So they've been hacked at some point, because that happens. Everybody wants to get into LastPass, right? Because if you get in there, if you get to my LastPass, or you get to anyone's LastPass, that will be gold for any hacker. I mean, my credit card details are in there. That's like, but they got hacked. But of course, that didn't help much, because they got hacked, and that means that they had access to their highly encrypted databases that had everybody's password. That needs like a different password for every database that's in there. So you know, LastPass got hacked. Yeah, so what? They got like one copy of my database, and it's encrypted by a strong password, and my LastPass password is something like this. It's like they can't do anything with that. So I didn't worry then.
Wall to see another wall.
Yeah, because that's how security works, right? You have like multiple walls set up. So that's why I said like the only password that isn't in my LastPass is my Gmail account password. I keep that one separate, because that's like the other golden gate that I have. Like if you get to email, you can get to anything. If you get to my LastPass, you can get to anything. Those two are separate. And I have eye on the chat. Are there any bad password apps? There are probably a lot of bad password apps. I was like,
the amount of applications that are out there just for like the niche things that we talk about sometimes here, like screen recording. There's hundreds of those. Passwords is a common thing, so I would imagine there are hundreds or if not thousands of those.
I think that like the most obvious ones to avoid are the ones that are built into Chrome, Edge, and Firefox. Not because they're bad, because they do use encryption and stuff like that, but because the attack surface there is very large. Because somebody gets like around whatever they're using for their encryption, and you know everybody uses Chrome and Firefox, and Edge is really growing, at least on me. But like, that is like a gold mine, and it's not their core business to do passwords. LastPass has only one job, and that's passwords. And I believe they get like one password, which I know a lot of friends of mine using. So I believe that one's pretty good, but they're very Mac centered, and I don't use a Mac, so that's one of the reasons that one dropped for me. On the open source side, I've used KeePass, which does encryption, but it really lacks that cloud sync functionality, though they might have added stuff like that over time. And there you have to do a lot of the heavy lifting yourself, because you maintain your own encrypted password file, which is way above what I would recommend most people do, because then you need to start digging into this stuff and really know what you're doing. And if you make a mistake, then somebody has all your passwords, which is bad.
Yeah, so I know when I spoke to Marie last week, She's given me access to her toolbox, her digital toolbox that she uses, and there's a link in the live stream if anyone wants to have a look at the tool she's using or used to use. And Pass One, I think, or Pass one of those two, was like one of the first things she had up there, and I was like, okay, Password Manager, obviously number one on the list.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Gail, your response to this? It works fine. It hasn't crashed on stream once.
Like I really need to borrow. Ask if my son is still using my Shadow account, and maybe borrow that one to you for a while.
My stream hasn't crashed. The internet, however, has had a bit of a moment, but that's the internet. That's not my computer.
No, but like Shadows, it's like a virtual computer. So you have like the whole computer on the cloud with like a beefy processor, and you just stream it to your laptop. You don't notice a difference, except the fact that the whole streaming is running on like a really fat PC on the cloud somewhere. I've used that to do my vlog during holidays because I don't have a PC with me then, and then I just run my tablet runs to Shadow, and then Shadow runs DaVinci Resolve with everything on it, and it just renders my videos in 10 minutes. And I'm just sitting on the couch in my pajamas going like, that was the vlog I did yesterday. It was like, that was easy.
That'd be nice. I mean, something that actually did surprise John was, so I've got a Canon M50 now, the Canon I'm using now. And I was using my webcam to record me. Obviously, webcam, I don't even know what really bad resolution. And the Canon's like 1080 can be 4K, but I don't use the 4K. And John was like, your computer is not going to let you edit those videos. Yes, it does.
It just takes a bit longer. That's how this works, right?
The thing is, the editing, no difference. No difference in the editing speed whatsoever. I've edited like 30, 40 minute worth like of video clip in there all at once, going through it, cutting, doing, adding loads of stuff. Doesn't change a thing. The only difference is the exporting, like the exporting and rendering speed. Instead of it being an hour and a half.
What are you editing? Premiere probably, or
4:9. Well, 4:10, sorry. It's like 10.
More is pretty good, actually. That's like my number one recommendation to people, because people go like, what do you use? I said, I use DaVinci Resolve. And what should I use? Not DaVinci Resolve. Like that has a learning curve. Like that's ridiculous. I mean, yes, I can, but like I wouldn't recommend it to beginners, because it's like you do a lot of work, and all this stuff is only needed if you're a fanatical nerd and you want to spend a lot of time figuring out. But color grading, I even color graded photos in that one. It's so good.
Yeah, I mean, DaVinci Resolve is one of those applications that it's free, but it's free for a reason. Like you need almost like half a degree of understanding to get all the buttons and where things go and what to do.
DaVinci Resolve is easy. Like anybody goes like, why is DaVinci Resolve free? I said like one of the panels, if you get that, is $25,000. It's like you can get a small car for their hardware. It's like this is meant for professional people that have way too much money. Like, yes, I have DaVinci Resolve. I have none of the other gear because even I can't afford that with my job. It's like.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing that attracted me to Filmora was two things. One, there was a YouTube channel that I watched anyway that did loads of how-tos. So I was like, well, I already follow this person. I already know half the stuff because I enjoy watching his content anyway. Elsewhere, Daniel Battelle is the name. He does stuff on StreamYard as well, and TubeBuddy and Nick and blah, blah, blah. And the other thing was I pay for it once and then that's it. And it's literally just a basics. Like you don't, there's no hard way to look at it. It literally tells you where to go, what to do. It's very hard not to figure it out. Whereas I don't know, like we were speaking very briefly before this, but the application I was exploring yesterday, The Brain, really, really old. When you look at the interface, you're like, what is this? And there are tons and tons of features, and you'd need to go through all of the menus to find everything. And that's what I spent like 2 hours doing yesterday. And I will probably do another one for the beta 12 that obviously came out. I'll probably do that Monday. And you're just like, there's so much, so many buttons to push, where to find and what to go.
Yeah, that's like.
Okay. I'm just scrolling through, see if I can find some questions. So this one, excuse me. Amazon have all my data that I put into Notion. That was an interesting.
Correct.
Mm.
All your data is stored at Amazon, and one thing that I found annoying, for example, is that like I was looking at the picture that I just had to you, and that one says US West 2, and that means that my Notion data is stored in the US. And that's, I can talk all day about how draconian the US rules are. But that was, of course, obvious because Notion is run in the US. It would be very nice, though, if they would upgrade it so that A, Notion is actually hosted near my country, which is good for response times, and B, because that's trivial, because it's Amazon, so you just say, like, I would also like this zone. And it would be very nice if my data wasn't stored in the US.
Yeah, so that was actually a question. I've seen a lot of people in the Reddit talk about, we want a Europe Discord, a Europe server, a European server, or an Australian server, or whatever. And with them storing the data in Amazon, I assume Amazon have servers in Europe, etc. So when I want a Notion server in Europe, would it be an Amazon server that Notion are using in Europe?
Basically, it depends a bit on how their setup is done. But it should be trivial because with Amazon, you can actually say like, hey, I would like to use data centers all over the world. And they will just pick the closest one because Amazon is smart. Like they have to pay for data that has to send over the lines. Like if I'm accessing Notion now, some poor electrode is getting sent all the way under the ocean to the other side of has to enter the US, which is already horrible enough as it is. Then get the data, get back to Europe.
US.
Yeah, and then give me the data, and they have to do that every time I type a letter. I mean, that's horrible. And Amazon needs to pay for that. So as soon as you tell Amazon, like, hey, you can also host it in Europe, and you have enough people in Europe, then Amazon starts spinning up instances of Notion in Europe, meaning that I start accessing the version in Europe as well, meaning that the lines are shorter. It means that I'm quicker working with Notion, which I'm not sure what happened, but lately I've been waiting on Notion too much. But I'm not alone in that, so I'll just wait it out. I mean, it needs to be sorted. I'm pretty sure some engineer at Notion has this on their board because it's annoying. And they work with Notion, so they'll find it annoying as well. And yeah, of course, like having it closer by means that I get all the benefits that I would expect from the European Union. I think it's not a technical issue because that's pretty easy. It's the whole shalada that comes with becoming part of the European Union. So they would probably need, if they want to do it right, they would need a sister company in Europe that would run the European section of Notion. And they would have to modify their Notion so that if I log in as a European, then internally it would route me to the European set of servers, avoiding anything going to the US. So if I would upload an image, it would know like Boss is uploading an image. So we put it into the US, not like the US, but in the European server. And that would make me personally very happy because I know that the protection laws for my privacy and data in Europe is much better than the US. I mean, the US is horrendous. Basically, anybody that's not living inside the US isn't considered a human being by US law. It's like, we don't care. I mean, if you're holding that oil drum, we're coming for it. It's like, no, it's like no right mind engineer tech person would want their stuff really a long time in the US. I mean, I like Notion a lot, and I'm already I'm already part of Google, so I'm pretty sure half my life is already backed up in the US server somewhere, 70 gigs of data. But I don't trust Google. That's why I have another service making backups of Google, because it's like.
Yeah, I think I can't remember who it was. Someone in chat said a couple of days ago they've got I think it was Sarah maybe. She said she's got a backup of her cloud which is backed up somewhere else. I was like, wait, so you've got 5 backups of your stuff? She was like, yes.
That sounds about right.
I
have the stack backup. I have the iDrive backup. Then I normally have an external drive backup, but that's currently with somebody else who I restored data for because she had the data loss. And she needed someone to recover that. And then, of course, I have my drive. And then I have 2 drives. I have stuff on it. And then I keep my old SD cards when I do a recording. So I keep that one around for a month before I wipe them.
I was going to show you the external hard drive, but the wire is too short and it can't get in front of the camera. I was like, where is it? I've got literally every single port out of my laptop is full. There is nothing that, like, I have all the USBs used. I have a USB, I don't even know what you call it, like an adapter that gives me more ports for all the stuff, because obviously I've got a camera at the moment, live stream. I got a mic, then I've got my external hard drive, and then like all the other bits and bobs that come out of it. You know, my laptop it does a lot. And I've got a keyboard as well, so because I don't like the laptop keyboard, it's too flat.
No, that's true. Like, I want to add something before Chris is like busy moving all his data out of Notion. Like, Amazon having access to your data is not the same as having access. Like, they have the data because it's on their service, but of course, as a cloud provider, they need to encrypt it, and then only Notion can uncrypt it. So they have your data. They could erase it potentially, that in theory, if they wanted to, but they can't access it. At least not by contractual obligations that they have. I'm pretty sure, though, that like if the U.S. government came to ask for it very kindly, they have some harsh regulations for that to actually access, which is annoying.
Yeah, just resolve. Not right now. So when it comes to the building an app thing, because I don't want to build. Well, okay. I'll try and phrase this in a way that makes sense. I want to build an app for me, but I don't want to build an app in general, because I know everything that goes on behind an app. I don't want to have anything to do with it. Security being one of them. I want to build an app as a project for me to understand how apps are built, right?
Yeah.
So the people that are building apps using other pieces of software, like the self-build no-code app type things that are going on all over the place, I'm assuming the data is stored in wherever that app is, because what they're doing is they're building an app, using an app, but the app is storing the data elsewhere. So I'm assuming the app that someone's building is storing data in the same place the parent app is storing the data. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, but it doesn't have to be like that, because what these apps usually do is that the data needs to be stored somewhere. Now, in the most simple form, it's stored in the same database set that they have in the cloud, because that's easy. That's just clicking, and then they can just connect it up. Anything that's a bit more sophisticated, like I think Google had like this self-app cloud bit as well. But of course, that hangs to the Google databases. But what they do is that you make like your own database instance in the cloud that's yours, that you have like a key to, and then the app stores it in there. Meaning that there's two databases. There's the one where the app was built in and the one where your data is in, and those things are then separated. Usually you don't have a choice, like if it's in Amazon or cloud, whatever they use to set up their cloud, it will be the same one, because else they would have to write APIs for all the cloud interfaces, and no one's got time for that. So that probably won't work, at least not with the self-build apps, unless you really like go up another tier and you download something like the Android SDK and you make an app in there. I've tried it once. I gave up on it. I did once pay someone on Fiverr, I think €75 to create an app for me to add a task to Todoist, because there wasn't an Android app at the time. Might have not been Todoist, could have been another Todoist to-do app, but I really wanted like quick entry, that's because I live on that. And so I was like, it was nothing more than like open it, type in, press the enter button. That was about it.
Yeah, so I'm curious with the app space. Obviously, there are what I would class as big apps, like the Notions, like the big task managers, the project managers. Then you have the extension apps. I don't know if they are actually apps or just extensions that go onto the browser typically. And then there are sort of like the middle ground apps that are sort of, they'll sit on your Mac or sit on a phone or an Android or whatever, that are just one use case specific. How do they all do it all? Does that make, like, how do they build an app with the privacy and security side of it? Because essentially they're taking data or using data or using an API in some way. So how do they do it?
So one of the ways for building software these days is nearly everything's connected, right? This is also why stuff like offline mode is very hard, because offline mode usually comes later, because that bit is some hard engineering, because then you need to get data. change it locally, send it back. That's pain. You don't want to do that as much as possible. But of course, once you are something like Notion and you have some space, then you need to have it at some point because people start asking for it and it doesn't become workable. But most apps talk with an API to a backend and are nothing more than a button on the front end that pushes a button on the backend for you. Meaning that either you're on the website or you're in the app, and either it's big or small, it's all nearly just push a button, do an API call, change data in the backend, come back, show you the data. And then very often they all use HTML and JavaScript, at least like a JavaScript engine like jQuery or probably React or Node.js or stuff like that. I'm not a developer, so don't pin me on that one. And I'm not sure what's the current famous.
I've heard of those things.
Yeah.
I've heard of them.
Anyhow, but like basically an app is like a website very often these days, unless it's a very optimized app. So like if you take something like Notion, I think that one's a web app. Like they just take their website and they take large parts of it through it, but then they mix in like part of it locally and part of it remote to make it snappier, which is good. This was also one of the reasons why on my tablet I was using the website very long, because it didn't have columns until they added that to the app, which was a yay moment for me.
Woo!
Yeah, like getting excited on my Notion features. So that makes it like easy to secure as well, because there's only that moment between transactions when you're typing in the data and pushing the button that you really need to think about the whole security bit, because the rest gets handled by HTTPS, because the thing that you see on your screen all the way until their backend is encrypted by standard internet technology, which makes sure that, and the only thing that they add to it is that their app checks that same certificate thing. So you know what I said in the beginning, there's a middleman and they both talk to that one and say like, hey, is this okay? Is that Notion? It's like, yeah, that's Notion. And then they're great. So that's what you're trying to go for here, right? It's like, that's the simplest form that there is. If it's a bit more complicated, then one of the ways they keep it secure, and that's both for Google and for Apple, is that they use something like a signage code. So once I make the code and I say, this is okay, I give it to Google. Google says like, is this your code? I say, this is the key that I can use to say that this is my code. And Google says like, takes the key to it, signs it, makes a package, and that package goes to an Android phone. And if somebody would change my code, even one letter in it, the key wouldn't work anymore and the thing would fail. Apple does the same thing. The only difference there is that there's a 2-week process in between where the Apple engineers look at it and make sure you're not trying to sell something without giving them their cut, which is how that runs on that end of the spectrum. So usually if you see places where the Apple app comes later than the Android app, that's because their process is longer. On the plus side, having that extra process in between means that there's less cruft coming in. Because if anybody ever dug into like the small app section of Android, we all know that's a hellscape. Nobody wants to enter that. I'm still not sure how they filter it out these days, but oh my God, I was with Android when it got started and that was horrible. That's why you find those apps where you can like hold your phone and then drink it like a beer, which we used to do when the things just came out. That was novel back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of visual apps out there. So moving through to the offline mode then, because I don't know how much you've explored Obsidian, but Obsidian is, my understanding is Obsidian is essentially a text editor rather than an app, or is it an app with offline mode? Because they're stored as markdown files and then you just edit them in. Yeah. Is it an app or is it an editor? Like,
it's an app that you locally download and then it uses markdown files as a backend.
Yeah.
So it's basically a text editor because it opens a markdown file. It does some tricky things by analyzing all the markdown files, getting data out of it. And because it stores it, I can take like the assumption here that what it does, it reads all the files, makes an internal memory array, like a mini in-memory database where it collects all the data and then sends it back to you. And it feels nearly instant, but for computers, it probably took a couple of seconds, which is like ages. It's like they'd be tapping and like going like on there. It's like, this is taking long. But of course, the benefit is that your data is all readable and easily accessible. You can put it anywhere.
Right. Yeah. So is that technically an offline mode, or is that just something that's reading the files you've already got on your computer and doing something with it? Because it is offline because it's local storage, but it was never really online to start with.
Yeah, so it is offline mode because you can use it without the internet. That's the old definition of offline.
Yeah.
The thing that you then go is like, okay, how do I do the syncing from offline to online? So with Obsidian, for example, I would probably use something like Git, which is what used for code, but works very well for Markdown files. And that means that I can upload my Markdown files when I get online again. So I can go in a plane, do all my stuff in Obsidian while I'm in the plane, land, and then open my Git and say push, and it goes like to the server and pushes it. Now the thing might hit something if somebody else makes a change as well, but with Git that works, because then if somebody changed the same thing, it will tell the second person, hey, you both changed it, do you want to merge it? Yes, and then you merge it. Most people, it would work easier to use just something like Google Drive or another place to store it on. And then basically it's a semi-online offline mode, because if you make a change, it gets sent to Google Drive, and then Google Drive sends it to somebody else. But it's, of course, remember that when I was watching Notion, I said like it's doing API calls, because else anytime you type a word in, it would have to upload everything, because that's what's happening in the background. So it's really using like an 18-wheeler truck to move a book around. It's like, I just typed the word, excellent, put it in the truck, and then they move it over to the other side to get it on the internet. It's really overkill. But, these days, because of all the computer power we have, except you, because your laptop, but we just deal with it.
I'll take it.
It's like you have to wait a bit. Like, it happens. It's not that bad.
So Obsidian have got a publish mode, and I think Obsidian and the Brain, i.e. the app that I explained yesterday, I think they work very similar, because they're both stored in Markdown files on your computer. So they're both local files, and then you can upload it to. So Obsidian have their Obsidian Publish, and then the Brain is the Brain Cloud. That's what they're called. But essentially, they're the same thing. You sync your Markdown files with an online version, and that's what you're saying. Is you're just basically you're pushing the Markdown file to an online cloud service storage somewhere.
Yeah, that's what you're doing. You're putting it like on a storage. So like it's like they have their own Google Drive, and if they're smart, they're using something like Git, because then they only upload the changes. So if you have like a 100-page document that you made, and you change 3 sentences, then their local system would compare the new version and the old version, say like, hey, these 2 lines should change. That's everything that happened. Excellent. Like, you just need to send 100 bytes over, telling the online server that like in that file on row 100. This word was changed to that. If you make that change, we're happy.
Right. And then I'm assuming because it's online, it then needs a database or a server to store that data separately to the local files.
Yeah. Right. It depends a bit on how they want to store it. But.
Yeah, so they'll be stored in 2 different places: on your local computer, which you can sync to the cloud storage, or on the cloud storage, which would be saved in one of the marriage. How many storage dumps are there? Obviously, Amazon is there. Are there many big servers that people use?
Well, I think that the main ones currently are, at the top of my head, Google, which has their cloud computing platform. Then you have Amazon, of course, that's a big one. Microsoft with Azure, that's what I'm currently working on for my current customer. I think those 3 are the biggest one. I'm trying to think if I'm forgetting any of the large players. Amazon was the one that started this whole gig. I mean,
they're on it.
Oh my God! When they started doing this, it was like, that's when people in my field said like, oh my God, we're gonna lose our jobs because they automated everything. And I'm just looking, going that like, no, they're just gonna find something more stupid, and then I'm gonna charge them for that. So, they always figure out something new, because now we have this cloud computing platform, and then they still end up at my desk, and it's like, I don't know how to do this cloud stuff. It's like, excellent, I can tell you that.
Yep.
And then we work on that.
Every automation, every integration, every tech development, you're still needed for something. As soon as they bring in an automation, how do I make the automation? How do I start the automation? Even with the tools now.
There's always people that need it. Which is fun, because it's like I mean, I am growing my job. I can't keep up anymore. At least, well, I can probably keep up if it was the only thing I was doing, but I just tend to do a lot of things at the same time. So these days, I trust other people to tell me how the cloud works, and I just mess around it a bit so that I know enough when people are trying to bullshit me. That's about the level of it. But I've moved up now, so like I'm like on the manager level, and that one's much harder. So like you're too busy dodging knives to actually get into the nitty gritty of the code bit. But it's like okay, it's fun.
Yeah, very true. I've seen this comment and I was like, I want to bring it up. I love learning about security related topics, but very interesting stuff. Great to see how it plays into Notion, and that is the point that I think a lot of people kind of like not necessarily neglect. I know from me as a like prospectively looking inside, I know I use the app. I don't know the behind the scenes, how the app works or anything like that. So when people start moaning about, I want this feature, I want that feature, why doesn't it do this? Why doesn't it do that? I don't know enough behind the scenes to say this is why. And security was one of those areas. I'm like, there must be a reason why they don't have end-to-end encryption or 2FA or whatever it is. And I would imagine it's that there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes as to how to integrate it all.
Could you, like a ridiculous amount of work.
Like the 2FA, could they put 2FA into Notion? Well, I assume they could, but how do you reckon that would affect Notion's usability, potentially speed? I don't know.
Well, technically, like they have a form of two-factor authentication because you can log in with something like Google, and Google has the two-factor authentication, so you use that to set up. And two-factor authentication itself isn't that complicated, so they could easily implement it. It just needs to be part of their priority board because they have like tons of things that they want to implement. Notion are perfectionists, definitely on their usability side. And my feeling looking outside in is that they have like a lot of user interface engineers and usability sets. They're kind of lacking on the infra and security end. There's not enough people there shouting about it. But then again, we always get shafted on the our division because we whine about things like backups and like getting stuff up and running, and that just takes away from the features everybody are waiting for, because the front end stuff is of course what sells the system, because yes, we're talking security now and lots of people care about security, but let's face it, it's not the thing that they were checking when they're deciding if they want to start or not start with Notion. It's like the second thing that comes after it. It's like, oh, I'll just mess around with it and they'll probably fix it soon. It's what I used to think when I started with Notion. I was like, the API can't take that long. It's like I stand corrected on that one, but it's like, okay, I mean, on the other hand, I know better than this. API isn't that important in the grand scheme of things, and security is one of those things that takes a lot of work, and it's definitely hard if you need to implement it backwards. But for two-factor authentication, to get back to it, the amount of work, you would need to store the key on their side, because a two-factor authentication has like a key that's in it, and then you would just use something like Google Authenticator or LastPass Authenticator, because there's an open standard for it. So you just get like this QR code and then you scan it with an app, and then you get these nice two-factor authentication codes. Let me see if I can show mine, because these change every few seconds, so it doesn't matter that I show those on stream. But like these are my, let's see, this is scan. So these are all the codes that get generated for different apps.
Yeah.
And because it's way too much for most people. But like I used to have two, and then I got to a company that actually uses it but doesn't have like one central login, and then you suddenly have like a stack.
Yeah.
But that's good. Like, I mean, so that's the amount of technical work isn't that bad. But of course, when you're Notion and you make a mistake there,
yeah,
that's the part that it gets hard. It's like there's a lot of people that aren't going to be happy. So you would need to set it up, make sure that it can be beta tested, so that a small subset of people can test and see if it doesn't break left and right. Is it easy enough to set up? One of the things I love about Notion is that it's very easy to use because they don't add everything. If I compare it to Coda has a lot of work to figure out. Like I'm sometimes writing stuff in there and go like, why didn't I know this sooner? And there's 1,500 buttons. And then I get the Notion and it's like, oh, this is so simple. I mean, I don't even write many formulas. I think one of my first templates, you made a comment like, what? A project template without formulas? Well, who does that? It's like, I do, because I don't care about formulas that much. Like I got two in my new one because I needed a few examples, but they're not really not as useful as they could have been. But also because like I like the simplicity of Notion. So it's one of those places where I go and I just store information. And it always looks nice.
The amount of people that say Notion's so complicated. I'm like, no, it's as complicated as you want to make it.
Yeah.
If you want to
Really,
have
just
tables and linked views and loads of toggles, loads of formulas, then you can. But if you just want to have a page, just have a page.
Yeah, well, I think very often where that one goes wrong is because people look at templates that people build, and a lot of the templates that are built by people that have been using Notion for a long time, and they've been adding a lot of stuff to it to make it like really add value. But all that added value also means it's more complex. It's one of the comments I got on the project management video that I made. It's like, oh, this is so simple. Like I can use it. Like that was the goal. Like it wasn't to be complex. It was just to get you started, and you build it because it's Notion. You get to build. That's the fun part. Like except for me, because I build stuff and then I have to reverse engineer it and remove all the cruft so I can share it with people.
I was going to say that's one of the reasons I want to learn to code is like I enjoy the building process. I enjoy creating, like having control over my own thing. And yeah, I know Notion heard formulas and ears pricked up. But yeah, the ability to create my own thing, I'm like, yes. But Notion's not entirely my own thing. I'm still restricted, even though it's a no-code builder. Yeah. I'm still restricted, and there are features in other apps that you can do. Recurrent task being one of them, weekly calendar view being another one. There are features that are in other apps that aren't in Notion, and if I could code, I could. I don't know if this is even possible. It's something in my mind that I would like is I could just build my own app for me. Yeah. Just like a local storage, my own app for me, functions the way I want, add a feature when I want it, because I'd have the ability to do that. I don't know if that's possible. It'd be nice.
One of the main things to do is like if you learn a bit of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, is that you can, for example, use things like GreaseMonkey to add JavaScript to a Notion page. So you can add a button or a bit of functionality that you're specifically looking for. Like before they allowed hiding of properties, I did that. I had like a JavaScript that allowed me to hide and show properties once in a while. I didn't use it that often. I'm very happy with the Notion implementation because that helps a lot. Also because it's over systems. But yes, yeah, like being able to code as soon as you do a bit of code, it starts compounding because once you know one language, it's easier to get into the next. And that's something that happens with me as well. Is like I very rarely have to do things 2 or 3 times because at some point my ears just go like, I know I can automate this, and if I need to do it one more time, then I'm gonna automate it because I'm done with this.
I'm not doing it again.
No, this is not. This is computer work. Give it to computers.
Is it Seth Godin? I think it's Seth Godin that says something, somewhere in his blog. He was sort of saying something along the lines of if it can be done easier or quicker, then like you can reduce the price type thing with the whole marketing. And I was just sort of thinking, okay, so essentially, if it's a repeated process, we could get a computer to do it for free. Yeah. and that's where I think a lot of jobs are sort of disappearing. And you're like, okay, so now I need to find a different skill set that can't be repeated. And creativity is something computers can't do yet.
They're pretty hard at work at it, though. It's like, man, that's jumping at the bit there. It's like I'm sometimes looking at it and go like, ooh, this is getting pretty close. But the plus side on that is, and that's one of the things that we're doing, is that all this artificial intelligence that is basically catching up on us is also helping us to move forward because it allows me to do more in the same time. So, for example, with DaVinci Resolve, I can rotoscope someone and DaVinci does it for me. That's a form of automatic intelligence that does my work, and it's not perfect. I mean, oh my god, I haven't had one time that I didn't have to like tweak it 16 times before it got it usable, but it shows that like half of the work gets done, and then I only need to do the other half, which is still half of the work done, which is great. Yeah. Oh man, AutoHotkey. I love AutoHotkey. That's good stuff.
That's good stuff. That
yeah, AutoHotkey is good stuff. Like the only thing that really like, I got a Stream Deck these days, and I was like, yeah, what do we need a Stream Deck? Like, I'm not a streamer. Like, I don't even read the chat, as my friends constantly tell me. Like, he's not reading the chat. Like, I always have to go on Discord to tell him what he's doing. But the Stream Deck, for example, is such an automation tool because they got all these automation things and buttons that you can push. So I have like a button to switch my camera in and out, but also I have a button to mute and push to talk. And switch to different views. I got one to restart my sound engine when stuff is wonky. Reset it. I got one for.
Didn't you have a Siri or an Alexa or something? Sorry if I just triggered everyone's thing, but
yeah, that's I've got Google Assistant devices throughout the house. I already know not to say like the keyword in front of it because my whole house wakes up.
So what do you use the Stream Deck for that's separate to your thing?
I use the Stream Deck for DaVinci Resolve. So I got all these hot buttons. So if I go to DaVinci Resolve, I go to the DaVinci Resolve, and it shows like color things, any feature that I use often in DaVinci, but not that often. So it shows me like the 4 colors that I want to mark my clips have, and then it shows like with a text what I mean by that. So rough cut, fine cut, ready for preview. It just needs like an info block and done or something like that. I don't have it on my screen right now. I use it when video calling, like in the beginning when I was chatting with you. Like on the moment, I think my M50 is already off, but I can switch cameras, so I use it to switch the cameras there. And I use it very often during the morning when I have daily stand-ups, because I use it to pop up the Jira board so that people can see what work I need to do, and also a few of those fun things where like the rollover stuff and the things that Twitch streamers have. But in practice, you don't use that often. And a lot of things, like small things that automate. I have like clipboard checks on it. So I have like one button and I get like a dashboard with all these snippets of text that I constantly need to tell people. And then I can just click there, push that button, and it types the whole text for me, rams enter, and I can keep going with my day. Which I can do without the hotkey just fine. But
I was going to say similar to AutoHotkey or Text Expander or whatever thing, yeah.
But it's like those tidbits that I don't use very often, because I guess like a visual overview, I can just push a button for it. And if you use it often enough, then because the buttons are always on the same spot, it becomes like this mental thing. So it's like, oh, and it's the same. Pop. There's like 2 buttons. The one to switch to like all the ones, and I know where it is because I used it 5 times already. Yeah, so the spatial awareness thing is very well done.
I don't know whether you've seen it, but Thomas and Ali did a collaboration video on like the tools that they use that's hidden or whatever. And Thomas Frank was saying that he has a keyboard and he maps certain keys on his keyboard to things in his AutoHotkey to do those commands, those actions. So I was like,
yeah,
it's pretty cool.
Yeah, AutoHotkey is like a lifesaver. Like the most used one that I have is the KRBG. So if I type KRBG, it removes it and it says kind regards Bas Grolleman. So like anytime that I need to type to someone, I use the Dutch version much more often as MVG. Dus met vriendelijke groeten. That is like a Dutch way of saying the same thing. That one I use like all the time. If I'm anywhere where I don't have AutoHotkey, I just immediately go.
yeah. Gail's just saying that he misses the AutoHotkey from going to Mac.
Yeah.
Dear.
Get a Stream Deck, really. Like, if you're going like, should I really get a Stream Deck? You can just get the app and just take the trial for 7 days. You can use your phone as a Stream Deck, but you can just try the software and everything. I was like sold in 2 days. Like, I need this in my life, and that's when I got like the biggest Stream Deck that I could get. Because I'm a nerd.
How many buttons has it got? Like 24?
Yeah, let's see, like 4x8. So yeah, 1632 is that? No?
Yeah,
Jesus, that's a lot of buttons. And then of course, like you have maps and folders. So I have like the 8 buttons on the right are to switch between different layouts. So like I got an OBS layout, I got a screencast layout.
So wait, so you've got 8 buttons on the side to map the 32 buttons that you've got?
No, the 32 buttons, 8 of those are dedicated to switch between, because you can't. There's not really like a way to do that fixed, but I just copied the same buttons over, because then it works like tabs, so I don't have to think about it. I just know like the third one from the top on the right is always go to DaVinci, and the 4th one is my voice meter. That means that I can control all my audio with the Stream Deck, because I've got like volume trackers for my headphones, but also for my microphone, for my speakers, for my wireless headphones. Those are all like on one display. They show like individual volume, and I can also adjust, for example, the volume for my music, which I put on like a separate track, which is ideal because when I'm working, I need my music a bit softer. Like if I'm editing or stuff like that, I want to be able to hear it. And then once I'm doing something where I just need to like get lost in the zone, but I don't need to concentrate as much, then I can switch my music on higher. It's like, have you ever heard that we're always using 100% of our brain capacity?
I mean, there's arguments going backwards and forwards.
Yeah, back and forth about it. But basically, our brain only has like an on and an off switch, and that's one of the problems. If we do something which only takes like 10 or 20%, like listening to someone, and we're not like totally engaged, and we have 80% left, we tend to start drifting off because we want to waste that 80% somewhere. So the music is like if I put it loud, it takes up a lot of that, and if I take it less, then it takes up less of that, and that fills it up to that max so that I don't get distracted. The other thing that I usually like, I got all these toys, like I think you talked about it, like stuff that I need to fiddle with and around. I don't need it here because I'm talking about security, but yeah.
I've been the whole time, like the whole, what is it, almost 2 hours now, and the whole time.
It's like, where's mine? Like, I don't know where mine is, but like, yeah, I had the same habit once I got into playing with the cap on it. Yeah. It's like I got the Canon M50 as well, so like, you know, it's just Canon team here. M50 is a wonderful device.
Chris, I'm going to say this. Comparison. It's context and comparison. I'm sure you are smarter than both of us in something that you know about that we don't. So it's certainly a comparison. But otherwise, like, yeah, no one's ever dumb. No one is ever dumb. That's my thought anyway.
No, it's like whatever knowledge you build up through life is whatever you focus on. Like, I have to explain that one to my son as well very often, because he looks at me and he goes like, "Why don't I know anything?" It's like, I got 25 levels ahead of you, like a 25 years more experience building stuff, doing things. And I said, like, there's no comparison in that regards. It's the security stuff that I'm talking about here. I mean, let's face it, I started programming when I was 12. This is like, and when I was 12, there was no internet. Like, you had to go like to the manual and just go to A and then try and type it. I don't have that free time anymore. I'm so glad it's so much easier to collect information these days. But it's all built up over years and years. What?
Collecting information brings up a whole new issue. It's easier to collect it, but now you've got more of it. You need to sift through it.
Yeah, that's like our whole job these days. It's like people sending me way too much information and then me dumbing it down. It's like, oof.
Oh yeah. Okay.
The one from the Nerdy Notion Airline. I didn't miss those days. Yeah, no, neither do I. Like, actually, like, I found a floppy disk today. I was like, what?
I'm old enough to remember what that is. Just. Oh yeah, I'll bring that one up. Oh yep. Yeah. Do you? We'll go last question because we're closing in on 2 hours.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. Bas, do you think it's easier to learn MySQL if you know how to use a Notion database?
Yes. Because like once you work with tables in Notion, you already get like the core. That's what tables are. And if you use rollup, then you also know stuff about relations, because that's how databases. This is one of the things, like, if we're talking about, like, I spent years looking at databases and not getting what it was until I figured out that databases have tables that point to each other, and that's how you get data structures. And that was really tricky for me. So anybody that thinks like, oh, he's talking about it so easy, that took me years. That's like, and Notion shows that in a much more simplistic way. Like, it's much easier to get around because you can touch the data and you can change it and very easily add a column. So once you have that down, it's much easier to learn MySQL. Now, if we get into optimizing MySQL, that's a whole different ball game, and that takes years. And then I'm still telling developers that their code is terrible. But I've been a database administrator for a couple of years. So when you get someone that spent like 2 days programming something, go like, look, I optimized it. And you go like, yeah, I could have done the same thing with a 5-minute SQL query update. Like, to query the database quicker. That's they don't like those kind of things. But it is true. Like, I mean, you're not going to win from a whole set of MySQL or Oracle engineers when it comes to getting data. It's and MySQL is super. I like it simplistic. Like, I'm usually using Postgres because it has a lot of extra features, just like Oracle, which also has a lot. These are all databases, by the way, for people that MySQL is pretty simplistic. One tier lower would be SQLite, which is a database in a file, which is totally code-based. SQLite is also very nice to know of its existence. A lot of offline programs usually have an SQLite database somewhere. So basically, that's the database that they talk to. And MySQL is like easy to learn. The basics aren't like that hard to learn, and you can always update and work on the set. I'm just wondering what the term was. Like you have like database normalization, which means that you try to keep every bit of data only once. So you don't want to copy data over things. Things like if you have like somebody in a contact address book, you have like a table with their name in it. And then usually you have like a separate table for addresses, because you can have multiple addresses for the same person, and you don't want to make double entries where you type someone's name twice because they have two addresses, things like that. But that's like, then you get like in the second layer of databases. But it's useful to know when you're talking Notion if you want to simplify your data structures. So if at some point, if you would read up on like data duplication in databases, that would help in your Notion bit, because you would learn how to avoid having double properties by using rollups. Then again, the rollups are not as good as databases, so you would still end up probably having to copy a few things to get the data you want everywhere, which is too bad. But we still love Notion anyway.
Yeah, Notion, don't feel left out. We still love you.
Yeah.
Okay, it has been great talking to you again. And so you mentioned you're going to be working, like doing 2 jobs, and then YouTube's going to be afterwards. Is there a way that people can contact you if they have any specific questions? Is like Twitter best, or email, or YouTube? Like where would it be?
Yeah, there's plenty of ways to contact me, which are on my YouTube channel, for example. And you can always email me. I believe it's info@toolstech.com. Just ends up in my email box. So I think that's the quickest way to get the initial contact. I'm always reachable. Sometimes it takes a couple of days, but I always get back on people. If I don't get back, then send another one, because then you probably end up in my spam folder, which would be weird, because Google usually does its best. But I never just outright archive something unless I really don't like you for some reason, which would be amazing, because I know very few people that I don't like.
Awesome. So it has been great talking. I've learned a lot of stuff. I assume other people have as well. Oh yeah, Gail saying thanks for the stream. Learned a lot of and great fun. It's always good fun.
Yeah,
we've got a fair few guests coming on in February. I think I've got 9 or 10 guests coming on stream in the next like 2 or 3 weeks. So lots of conversations like these is going to be good fun. Lots of learning in February. I hope everyone has a good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time it is where you are. And I'll see you guys tomorrow on the Notion Nerds podcast YouTube channel. Yeah. Bye, everyone.